Hello and welcome to this training session, which is part of our suite of inputs around the nurture principles. You will recall that in August 2020, everyone who was working in schools and settings across SBC took part in the introductory training that was put out at that time. That was the beginning of the project to develop SBC into a nurturing authority. The project has then progressed to delivering training on each of the 6 nurture principles, and you will already have attended the first of those, which focused on the importance of establishing a safe base. We're now going to look at the second principle of nurture, which is that all behaviour is communication, and 2 subsequent principles will be looked at in the following academic year. Here we have a graphic that sets out the 6 nurture principles and shows how they connect. Children's learning is best understood developmentally. The classroom and school environment need to offer a safe base to support children's learning socially as well as emotionally. Nurture is important because it supports the development of personal well-being. Language is a vital means of communication, and all behaviour is communication also. And transition is an important feature of children's lives. And the focus for today's presentation is that all behaviour is communication. By way of an introduction, it's worth noting that not all the nurture principles are specific to attachment theory, but they are based on a combination of sound theory, ethical principles, and research evidence. So when we say that all behaviour is a communication, we are meaning that it is a communication about a person's state of mind. This obviously applies not just to children and young people, but to all people. Our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, our hopes, for example, are all mirrored to a greater or lesser extent in the ways that we behave and act. Therefore, this session is looking at how we can use that basic aspect of human psychology to understand our children better and to adapt our responses in the light of that understanding. An important element in this session is that it is focusing on encouraging everyone to take on board the importance of thinking differently about children's behaviour. This is as much about our own mindset and the ways in which we interpret the significance of what children and young people are doing. So we hope that this session will give food for thought. Here we have the aims for this session. Many among you will be very familiar with some or even all of these. Others of you may be at a different point in your own journeys. The key point is that these perspectives are central to how we understand and interpret young people's behaviour. So our aims are to develop an understanding that children and young people's behaviour can usefully be seen as a communication, to develop further ways of understanding these communications, to explore how we can respond to children's behaviour in that light, to recognise that relationships are crucial in supporting children's behaviour and learning, and to explore the usefulness of attuned communication, and we'll discuss what this is during the session. In the first part of this presentation, we start by looking at how we can see children's behaviour as communication, and then we go on to consider ways in which that can be helpful to us. And part 2 of the session looks at the other side of this coin, how we as adults communicate to children through our own behaviour. It's important to bear in mind that communication is of course a two-way thing. We as adults are communicating with children through our behaviour just as much as young people are communicating with us through theirs. We need to hold in our minds the principle that all behaviour is meaningful. Even behaviour that seems meaningless or random or even foolhardy has meaning embedded within it. When we experience behaviour as problematic to us, it can be helpful to remind ourselves of this. Seeing the behaviour as a communication about the young person's world can help us here. It can be telling us something even though we may not always be sure precisely what. So when we encounter behavior that is problematic for us, this should prompt us to make our own attempts to make sense of it. So, how do we go about making sense of behavior that is problematic? There are several things we can do, but central to them is the kind of questions we ask ourselves about what might be going on. We might wonder, and we might develop possible explanations. These possible explanations are our hypotheses. We cannot be certain that we are right, but developing possible explanations that might guide our responses is helpful. For example, we might wonder to ourselves about a number of possible factors that may underlie challenging behavior. These may be the fears the child has, they may be issues around sensory overload, maybe issues around academic challenges or peer group events or family events. The list is a pretty long one. Considering these as possible explanations, as hypotheses, can help us develop a response that might be more productive or helpful for the young person. We are probably all familiar with the idea of the iceberg as a metaphor for our behaviour and feelings. Its point is that the surface behaviour we observe does not tell us everything about what the person is experiencing, feeling, or thinking, because these aspects are below the surface. So here we have observable behaviour which is at a surface level, but what lies beneath is important if we are to understand the behaviour more fully. Importantly, we would not always be correct in assumptions that we might make about what's going on below the surface. Considering the range of possible underlying factors, that's where our wondering, our hypothesizing about possible explanations comes into play. Under the pressure of demanding and busy situations, it can be easy and understandable to make a quick assumption about what behaviour may mean. So that is a risk we need to guard against. So, below the surface, you can see there may well be all kinds of thoughts. Here are just a few examples. It may be fairly easy to access these, and this can be done in a number of ways, perhaps through conversation or discussion with the young person. A young person may well be able to explain their thoughts about an incident, given the right context and support, for example. At a deeper level yet, we can find a range of feelings. Here again are just a few examples. These can be a lot more difficult to access because they may not be something the child is actually aware of. They may not have the vocabulary or the level of insight or maturity to be able to put these feelings into words. These deeper feelings, hopes, fears, motivations, for example, may underlie the surface behaviour that we can see, but may be displayed in varying ways. For example, a young person may well have a deep-seated feeling that they are worthless, perhaps because of some experiences they have had in earlier life. These feelings might in turn lead to a variety of thoughts, which could be about their work, their abilities, or about other people. In this example, the child may not be aware that they have these underlying feelings, so they may not be apparent to themselves or possibly anyone else. But their thoughts would still be there, even if the underlying reason is too well hidden to be seen. But it's equally possible that the thoughts are hidden too, although possibly not as deeply obscured as the feelings are. No matter how visible or invisible the underlying thoughts and feelings, there could be a range of behaviours that could arise from them. For example, the young person might just withdraw and not engage in work or in social contact. Alternatively, they might be challenging or even threatening in the classroom. The key point is that the underlying factors are important to understand if we are to understand the surface behaviour. Very different behaviours could have similar causes. Equally, very similar behaviours could have very different causes. So we need to be really careful in our thinking and not making assumptions. We've already noted that behaviour has meaning, and quite often behaviour is also functional. By this we mean that it serves one or more of a number of possible purposes for the young person. Seeing behaviour as serving a function can be helpful, even if the functions aren't always apparent to us. There are a number of questions that could help guide us in understanding the function that is being served in any particular behaviour. It may be that this function is about making social contact, trying to achieve some social interaction with other people. It could be about gaining approval socially from other people, from peers or from other adults. It could be a way of seeking stimulation, which could be, for example, sensory stimulation, perhaps in the case of a young person with complex learning needs, or it could be in other forms, for example, if the curriculum is not engaging enough for the young person. Sometimes risk-taking can be a way of avoiding unpleasant thoughts or memories, or the behaviour could be a way of obtaining things that the child needs. As an example, we know of a 6-year-old boy whose behaviour in school was found to be very challenging. He would run around the classroom, interfere with others' work, and roam around the school at any given opportunity. Outside, he might throw stones at people, and also wouldn't come in at the end of break. On close examination, one hypothesis was that his behaviour served the function of gaining him social contact. He really wanted to be interacting with adults and also with peers, and his behaviour seemed to be serving to give him the social contact and stimulation that he seemed to need. This made a difference to the way we responded to him, and so we were able to focus on ways of giving him social attention and approval, which helped improve the situation. So, we can see that the young person's behaviour is a communication about their need, and that's why the behaviour has a function. It does not mean that it's the best possible way of meeting that need. Rather, it is the solution that the young person has come up with. It's extremely important to be clear that these are not conscious strategies that the young person is using. As a result, thinking of behaviour in this way can prompt us to think about helping them develop alternative solutions that meet the same need, but with better outcomes. We should work on the assumption that children and young people, just like all of us, are trying to make sure their needs are being met. If we meet behaviour that seems dysfunctional or problematic, then we could see this as a sign that some aspects of their needs are not being met. The functional approach can help with this. When we are faced with problematic or troubling behaviour, our task, or one of our tasks certainly, is to make sense of it. The way we frame the behaviour has a big influence on how we interpret it, and that in turn affects how we respond to it. Seeing the child's behaviour as a communication gives us a privileged insight into the child's world, and that is something that we can make use of. And as part of our hypothesizing, our wondering about alternative explanations, we can look for different possible meanings for the behaviour, bearing in mind the iceberg model we've spoken about earlier. The next few slides show how common descriptions, common explanations of behaviour are often of little use in developing strategies and tactics, whereas reframing the behaviour and exploring alternative explanations, as opposed to mere descriptions, can often open up the situation to helpful ways to manage them. This is a description of behaviour that we often hear. Bear in mind that it is in itself just a hypothesis. It's an inference by the adults. The behaviour itself may be the child's way of having their needs met. It could be influenced by a number of possible factors. And here are two examples in a new frame. So, what if the child has in the past been starved of attention from significant adults in their life? What if the young person simply wants to be remembered? These are hypotheses again about the child's needs, and the behaviour can look very different in the new frame. If we see The behaviour as a product of anxiety, about fear of being ignored or forgotten, about separating from others, about needing connection with others, our responses can be very different from what we would do if we see it simply as undesirable behaviour. So these are possible things that could help, and you can see that they are quite different from what we might do if we framed the behaviour as undesirable and so worthy of being ignored. These are, of course, just examples and aren't proposed as a solution that should be tried automatically in every case. Here's another example of a negative interpretation being placed on behaviour. For example, a young person may ignore our efforts to speak with them about something important, or may not respond to the expectations that have been set out clearly. I'm sure that you can think of many other examples that could easily be seen as a lack of respect. But there could be other factors. Let's put it in a new frame. What if, well, we don't know the prior experiences of the child? Have they experienced lack of respect themselves? Do they distrust adults as a result? Do we assume that children will trust us? If the child has learned not to trust and so does not believe that adults are safe and reliable, or that schools are safe and secure places, then this could easily underlie behaviour that we find challenging. Again, there are possible actions to take when we see the behaviour in a new light because of its new frame. You can see how different the interaction could be if we can make time to talk, if we can find moments for connection through humour, or if we could display empathy. Here's quite a common experience, that our efforts to encourage, to praise, to reward seem to bear little fruit. Or perhaps the child or the young person seems to react badly to praise, almost as if they can't receive it. But how might it look if we framed it differently? Maybe the child's developmental level is such that praise is too abstract for them. And shame can be a very powerful factor influencing behaviour. A young person may feel that they do not deserve the praise. They may feel that being praised simply draws attention to their failure. This could be the result of a range of negative or damaging experiences over the years. So, what might help? These are, again, they're not tips, they are simply prompts for thought, and they can come as a result of the different ways of thinking about the young person in the light of placing things in a new frame. They're just being manipulative. That's such a judgmental term, really. It assumes that there is a malign intent, that the child is meaning to do harm, and it also assumes a capacity and a level of understanding in the young person. So how might we reframe it so to help us see it differently? In this case, if we see it as the child's efforts to have their needs met, to feel safe and secure and successful, that can help us to generate responses that might be more in tune with the young person's needs. So what might help? Well, again, these aren't tips, but they are more indicators for ways of responding that take account of the possible underlying factors. These are possibilities that are opened up because of the reframing. Without the reframe, one risks being drawn into punitive responses, which are likely to be unsuccessful under these circumstances. This can be a very common experience, and low-level disruption can be constantly wearing for teachers and other staff, and high-level disruptions, of course, even more challenging. So how can we frame it differently? If we see the behaviour as an indication of the needs of the young person, then that opens up opportunities to think creatively about interventions. In this case, seeing disruptive behaviour as a sign of the child's previous experiences can be helpful. We'll discuss later what we mean by attuned interactions in this second point. And what might help? Well, again, these are not intended as simple cure-alls, but they are offered as explanations and associated actions that could help make the behaviour more meaningful and more manageable and therefore less threatening. They want everything done for them. If a pupil seems unwilling or unable to be actively involved in their learning, maybe they appear totally dependent on adults to do things for them, to support them. This is an example of behaviour that is not disruptive or challenging in the way that more acting out behaviours can be difficult to deal with, but it can still be helped by reframing. And here are a couple of possible reframes. What if the child has missed out on periods of healthy dependency on an adult? Or what if they've experienced neglect or abuse that's affected their attachment? Seeing the dependent behaviour as a sign of unhealthy earlier experience opens up possibilities for developing support and interventions that address the underlying need rather than trying to modify that surface behaviour. So again, ideas, possible thoughts, ways of thinking that might take one forward. So now we come to a task for a breakout discussion, which could take 10 or 12 minutes or so. So in your groups, select one of the statements and in your discussion, explore a time when it was helpful to see the behaviour in a different frame. How did that help? Might be a good idea to make a copy of this slide either by a photo or using the snipping tool to take a screenshot so you can refer to it in the group. Each group should nominate someone to record the key points and feedback as appropriate. Before the break, we looked at how the language we use to describe behaviour can strongly influence how we understand it. If we can reframe the behaviour, that opens up possibilities for future action. And we've also talked about the importance of wondering, of developing hypotheses about what may be behind the behaviour that concerns us. And that there are a number of traps that we can fall into when thinking about what behaviour may mean. And here we can see the trap of assuming that there is intent to do harm or to cause difficulty. And there are words to look out for. These words here are all clues to falling into this trap. They're all negative, judgmental terms and don't encourage us to look beyond the surface. Even if we are not meaning to imply the child intends to cause harm, these are laden words that can keep the focus away from the underlying need. These intent assumption words are often unhelpful as they have a closing down effect. They don't help us to develop creative solutions. Whereas if we can reframe the behaviour in the ways described previously, it can be easier to think of creative ways forward. This second hypothesis trap relates to another nurture principle that we will be looking at in more detail next year, that learning is understood developmentally. But what we mean here is that there is a trap where we assume the child has the social or linguistic skills to express their needs in the way that we prefer. Would they need to behave in these ways if they were more skilled or more competent? For example, consider a young person with social communication needs whose actions cause distress to others. They may not manage personal space very well, and so they may hurt others as a means of achieving their goal of playing with a preferred toy that someone else has. They are not intending to cause harm, but do not have the communicative skills to handle that situation in a better way. So it can be useful to start with the assumption that a young person is doing the best they can. That can lead us, again, to think of new ways of interpreting their behaviour and so adapting our responses in the light of that. There are parallels here with points made earlier about the advantages of seeing behaviour as functional. Asking oneself the question, what function does this behaviour serve the young person, can help with this. SPC is proposing that nurture is used as a universal approach because of its values and perspectives. It's worth remembering even so that nurture groups were initially developed to help children with troubled and damaging experiences. So we want to say a few words here about children and young people whom we now recognise as having experienced trauma and adverse experiences. For children and young people with troubled pasts, We can sometimes be surprised by their reactions to seemingly innocuous events until we remember these points. Many sensory reminders can trigger dysregulation. These are points to consider when trying to understand possibly unreasonable behaviour. Similarly, bearing these thoughts in mind when we are hypothesizing about the meanings of behaviour can be helpful. Pulling together some threads from the matters covered so far, let's look at some of the implications of seeing behaviour as communication. A key benefit of this approach is that it depersonalizes. It allows us to focus on seeing the behaviour as an indication about the state of mind of the child. It's not about me, even when it can seem directed personally. Taking it as an indication of the young person's needs, or of their current emotional state, or of their social or linguistic skills, allows us to respond to those needs rather than to the surface behaviour alone. And this in turn can help us to manage our own responses to behaviour that we find problematic. Relationships are, by their very nature, reciprocal. They are two-way. It takes two to tango. Because of this, we need to look at how our adult behaviour communicates to young people and the positive effects we can bring about by doing this. So in part one of this presentation, we looked at ways in which it can be very helpful to see the behaviour of children and young people as a communication, as a privileged insight into their world. In part two, we're going to look at how we use language to build successful connections with young children and young people. And this is at the heart of teaching and learning and goes way beyond nurture thinking. It's all about how we as adults make relationships with our pupils and use those relationships to promote learning. A critical role for the adult is that of making the link between the external and internal worlds of the child. What does that mean? Well, it's about helping young people to make sense of their experiences of the world in the light of their own internal thoughts and feelings. As an example, we can see this kind of thing happening in restorative conversations where we can help a young person to reflect on their own behaviour and to consider the thoughts and feelings of others. This scaffolding of experience and understanding is so important to children's academic learning and to their social and emotional development. And we will see a number of examples of this later in the presentation. I now want to show you a clip of Professor Colwyn Trevarthen, who is going to speak about the importance of relationships. Professor Trevarthen, he conducted world-famous, groundbreaking research over many decades into the ways in which we, as babies, begin to form relationships, and his insights here are really instructive, I think. He's talking about babies in this clip, but what he's saying applies as much to school-age children and adolescents. The key point he's making here is that human beings are social beings, and so relationships and seeking to make connections are at the heart of all we do.
Well, the child has a very, very strong instinct to find other people because they're the only thing in the world that can confirm their belonging. I mean, their need to be part of a community. They have to be a community with people so they can form a private world. I mean, we all have a kind of, if you like, attachment to the house we live in or the room we sleep in or, you know, or the objects that we possess. And babies can be like that too, but really they can't have companionship with an object. It's limited, very limited. And they know that. I mean, they can, Winnicott talked about, you know, having a blanket as a kind of substitute for the mother. It's not, because you can't have a conversation with a blanket, really. You can have a conversation with yourself using the blanket to support the idea, but that's not quite the same. So babies are looking for companionship, looking for somebody. And I would like to make the point that the baby's looking, or curiosity, is more important than any parent's desire to teach the baby, or anybody's desire to teach the baby. The baby is not a pupil. It's not just an ignorant human being that needs to be taught knowledge. But to be part of a human community which is sharing knowledge and understanding, you don't have to have a teacher. You just have to have company, good company. And that company can be of any age. And there's something which I'd like to emphasize, that certainly by the time a baby is 3 or 4 months old, siblings, older siblings, can be very good companions and play with the child happily. And I think that by the time a baby is 6 months old, they can get along fine with a group of other kids of different ages. They don't have to be all the same age, and they don't have to be all babies, and they don't have to have adult supervision all the time. And I think that the proper environment for children to develop their relationships and their sense of belonging and knowing and understanding and their preparation for learning about the world is a community, like a village square with children running around and babies being handed from one lady to the next, you know, and having all sorts of contacts. I agree with Bruce Perry, who says that what the human brain is looking for is relationships, or yes, engagements. And it's not with just one person. So there's a qualification for attachment. Babies do, especially when they're distressed, want the care and concern of somebody who they know well and who's affectionate. So they do have a strong attachment to their mother who looks after them. But the companionship, having fun, that they like to have that with their mother too, but they can have it easily with lots of other people, including their fathers, actually.
What I'd like to show you here is a quote from another world-leading authority, this time Professor Jim Cummings, who's famous for his work in the field of bilingual education. But here he's talking about relationships and how they are central to success in education. And I think he makes the point very well. So let's just look at precisely what he says. Human relationships are at the heart of schooling. The interactions that take place between students and teachers and among students are more central to student success than any method of teaching literacy or science or maths. When powerful relationships are established between teachers and students, these relationships frequently can transcend the economic and social disadvantages that afflict communities and schools alike. And that is why we're looking at the link between behaviour and communication in this training session. So here we have an activity for you, something to discuss in the breakout groups. We have 10 minutes or so. Think of the best teacher that you ever had as a pupil, and what did they do that was so effective for your learning, and how did that feel for you at the time? So again, capture the image in whatever method suits you best, so you can refer to it in the discussion. Please have someone in your group act as scribe to feedback the key headlines. So we've been thinking about ways in which the quality of the relationship is likely to be key to a number of positive factors in the child's learning experience. And this brings us now to the concept of attunement. Now, attunement refers to communications where there is a good connection for all the participants. So when communication is attuned, the interactions are clearer and the quality of the connection is higher. This is a quote from Hilary Kennedy that describes it for us. So attunement refers to harmonious and responsive relationships where both partners play an active role. So it increases the likelihood of positive interactions and successful connections between those involved. And this can result in people feeling that they are on the same page, if you like. So we're more likely to feel that someone gets me, that someone cares about me, and that someone thinks about me. So what does attunement look like in practice? Well, it's easier to describe the elements involved, and so we'll look at these in the next few slides. So what's happening when we have attuned communication? Well, firstly, the language and behaviour of those involved shows awareness of the other's emotional state, and that awareness is important. But more than that, we're being responsive to the needs of the other person. We're responding differently because you recognise that there are needs there. And when we do that, we are opening up the possibility of dialogue about emotions. Now, this process of awareness, responsiveness, and dialogue is at the core of attunement. When this happens, the relationships involved are enhanced and strengthened. And I'm sure we can all think of occasions when we've had a discussion with someone who got us, and how different that felt from a discussion with someone who we didn't click with at all. We're now going to start looking at the impact of attuned communications on children through the messages that they receive. So what we are looking at is the connection between what I do, the me here, and what you may feel. So we're starting from the foundation. We have the basis of positive relationships coming from at the foot, being attentive with a friendly posture, eye contact, etc., and the young person feeling recognized and important. And when we act so as to encourage the communication from the other person, they can feel that we are interested in them. And when we show that we receive initiatives from the other person, they can feel that they are being listened to. And when we are able to develop interactions to an attuned level, then the other person can feel that they are engaged in the connection. Guiding and support serves to open up possibilities for future learning and support. And when the discussion is deeper, that can help the child to manage their own behaviour and their learning. These are the 6 levels of attunement. It's a framework that helps us to understand the nature of interactions, and it shows factors that contribute to the development of positive relationships. These are not about how to solve a problem when it comes along. This is about how positive relationships are fostered and enhanced. And these relationships in turn can make it easier to solve problems that do come along. The key point is that building these factors into our communication with young people enhances both their learning and their social and emotional development. This slide gives us an overview, and then we will look in detail at the key points in the following slides with examples to demonstrate them. So the next slides explore these principles, and let's look at some examples. We're looking at those principles in turn. We're going to start from the bottom up, and giving attention is the foundation of attuned communication. And this slide shows a number of non-verbal ways of showing that we are giving attention. And we're going to show you in a moment a clip of some primary school staff who are demonstrating these principles in their interaction with primary children. Principles apply just as much to secondary as primary. Note how the children appear to respond, but also focus carefully on what the adults are doing. The first bits are very quick, and it's the non-verbal elements that we're paying attention to, so look out for that. It can be difficult sometimes to hear what the children are saying, but don't worry, because we're focusing on what the adults are doing. As you watch the clip, it's about 30 seconds long. Look out for the ways in which the adults are giving attention in the examples listed. The first segment is only 5 seconds long, so be alert. Let's see how it looks.
What fruit would you like to be?
Dragon fruit.
A dragon fruit. What fruit would you like to be?
I forget what it's called.
Would you like to be an apple?
I forget
Ah.
what it's called.
Pear?
No.
What fruit? Strawberries?
Watermelon.
A watermelon. So
this is a step on from giving attention. It's a step further towards stronger engagement through the ways in which we encourage initiatives. This is a really valuable way in which we can show to young people that they are indeed valued. So a number of examples here. By waiting, we are often allowing the other person to initiate first, and then we can respond. This requires us to pay careful attention to their initiatives, which of course could be subtle and not easy to spot. Tone of voice is of course an important element in the way in which we show encouragement. And we can help encourage initiatives by noticing, by commenting, by naming things positively. This is not about asking lots of questions, it's about giving space after each initiative and waiting patiently for any response. So here are some practical examples of the ways in which we can encourage initiatives in the way in which we respond. Again, it's not so much what we say as the way we say it. And we've got a clip to show you some teachers putting these things into practice. The clip starts rather quickly, and you won't really be able to hear what the first child is saying, but to tune you in, she's telling the teacher that she got it wrong, and she's describing what she did, but our focus is on what the adult is doing in response. So let's have a look at that.
Miss, do you know how I got it wrong? I wrote 50 instead of 150.
But at least you know where you're going wrong now. That's why we practice it, isn't it? Because then we can work it out together.
Right, boys and girls, how are we all today? Good, excellent. Right, so first of all, we'll go through our listening skills, okay? So, first one, Kayla. You choose one. Oh, great description, Kayla. So we've got striped, all different stripes on our towels. Wait a minute, wee. There's a kettle. Something else? An oven. Who are you going to ask? Who are you going to choose? Aaron.
Each of the attunement principles is a step further on towards fuller engagement and connection. A step on from encouraging initiatives is responding to spontaneous initiatives from young people, and this is about how we take on the young person's initiative. The ways in which we receive initiatives makes a difference to how likely it is for the child to carry on with their communication. Extending the interaction is an important step in enhancing engagement. Of course, all of these examples could be natural ones or could be a bit forced, so you need to be careful with that. Showing that you have heard or noticed the young person's initiative is important. Being friendly or even playful as appropriate. Returning eye contact, smiling, nodding in response. Receiving what the other is saying or doing in words. Repeating or using the other's phrases can be a useful way of showing it. We've got examples of this again with some video clips in the next slide. So here we have some examples of adults receiving initiatives from young people, and here are some to look out for. Again, in the clip, focus on what the adults are saying and doing. Again, there may be times when it's hard to hear what the children are saying, but that's much less important than just focusing on the adults and how they are responding. So let's.
Thank you.
How do you get the Bible?
Right.
It's not fair.
Because I'm bigger, I'm taller than you.
I'm the centre, so I think the picture.
Do you understand? Thumbs up if you understand. 3 clues. Okay. Right. Who's showing me good sitting? Oh, everyone. Well done.
When you're saying that, what you're doing is you're being considerate of someone else's feelings, because you're thinking about how they would feel and thinking about the consequences of your own actions, and that's quite important, isn't it?
As attuned interactions develop, they increasingly enhance the level of connectedness and strengthen relationships. And here are some examples of how attuned interactions can develop further. When these features are present, they give a sense of being valued, of being heard, of being taken seriously by the other person. They show an empathic response, which in itself can help in the development of empathy in the young person. So being able to contribute to interactions equally, to receive and then respond, to check the other is understanding, to cooperate, helping each other, waiting attentively, giving a second or a further turn on the same topic, and giving and taking short turns. Turn taking with the turns being of similar length adds to this, as does increasing the number of turns. And now we've got something to look at that shows examples of developing attuned interactions. So look out for these things. Again, let's see what we can see.
Kyle, where are you today?
I'm at the top
You're up the top. We've got a happy bunch this morning. This is good. Why are you up the top?
because I had a good weekend because I went to go and see the King thing.
Oh, the
I
sick.
seen King.
You were both there.
Uh, and it was really fun. And yesterday I found another talent that I had, and it's doing tattoos.
And is that one of your own creations there?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So that might be something you might want to go into when you leave school then?
Mate.
Maybe?
Yeah.
How did you manage to do that one?
I just drew the design that I wanted and then put some glue, then put some glitter over and shoot it off.
Okay. And you've been to see the film that Kyle's going to see as well, haven't you?
Yeah, and it's really good.
So Kyle, that's something for you to look forward to.
And also I'm
Which
gonna,
film was it again? Sorry, Darren.
Jurassic World, The Lost Kingdom. And also I'm gonna go to swim this weekend, and the golf trip is also up, so I can't wait until that.
So it is a busy week.
It's been a very busy week, and I've got cadets, and then I've got judo, and then
Loads of things going on.
The next level up in this hierarchy of attunement principles is that of guiding, the way we support and guide children in their learning, whether it's academic or social or emotional learning. And the key point here is that for these supports to be successful, they have to have the quality of the relationship at its heart. For children's learning to progress, the level of connection, the level of trust, if you will, has to be established. This is stronger when it's based on the earlier attunement principles that we've just been looking at. And that's why the basics are important, because they form the foundation of those stronger connections. Those lead in turn to improved engagement and enhanced learning and development. There are some really nice examples in this clip of how this adult is guiding the children's thinking. Again, it can be quite hard to make out what the children are saying, but ignore that and focus on what the adult is saying in the first place.
Okay. And do you think that Abby and Layla are good friends? Yeah. So that might have affected them a bit more.
They sit next to each other right now. And they usually play next to each other, but yesterday I
Okay. But do you think, is there steps that they could have taken to calm down, because they came in quite upset, didn't they?
Well, Abby was crying and Layla crying, but she was
So say sorry at the same time, okay? But do you think that Layla needed? Do you think that Layla realised that she'd done something wrong?
I said, say sorry, she must take it out.
Well, Layla was quite upset as well. So there were hurt feelings on both sides, weren't there? Okay.
At the highest level of attunement, we're thinking about something called deepening discussion. And here are some examples of higher order responses and supports to children's learning. It's when the ground has been laid with the earlier attunement principles in place that this kind of deeper, richer learning can take place. Without the foundation of those earlier principles, it can be much harder to carry out these approaches, and efforts can frequently end in failure. So the key here is that where difficulties occur, it can be useful to go back down to the lower levels in the hierarchy, and this can help re-establish connections. And this slide takes us back to the levels that we looked at earlier, all on the same slide this time again. Looking again at this hierarchy, we can see that the higher order learning is based upon those lower levels of attunement, and they support the quality of relationships. And as a result, they are central to successful and productive learning, as well as supporting the young person's connection to school. The question of how messages are communicated by school staff leads us back to our principles of nurture. These points tie in closely with Nurture Principle 2, which you've looked at previously, the notion that it's important to think of the school as creating a safe environment for children's learning. So here we're thinking of messages such as "you belong here," which is a very basic one, saying we actually want you, we value you, we notice the things you do well. Communicating the message that "I am with you" can often be done just by a glance or a smile from the other side of the room, indicating that the child has been noticed, that the teacher has them in mind. This can be crucial for children who have not experienced constancy in relationships with adults. Given the message that "you are safe here" involves structures being put in place to support pupils to manage, say, a change of task or a change of routine, for example. Making it clear that people's feelings are okay is an important message. Everyone needs to be able to express feelings without fearing that the other person might be overwhelmed. Psychologists refer to this as a process of containment, showing through our actions and language that we are not troubled by someone else's feelings that they're expressing is really important, helping children to keep safe. And then a message that "I will help you understand." This indicates to the child that they're not alone in facing a problem with learning or with a social aspect of school life. Again, the important message is that they will be helped to problem solve. So here is an activity for you, something to discuss in groups, and we'll say give about 10 minutes for this. Again, capture the image in whatever way suits you so you can refer to it when you need to. And please have somebody make a note of your key points from your discussion. This slide summarizes for us the overall importance of seeing behavior as a communication. So seeing the child's behavior as a privileged insight into their world can help us to depersonalize. That in turn frees us up to think and act differently in response. So when someone senses that their feelings are being understood, that gives a sense of containment and safety, and that in turn in itself can defuse difficult situations. There is a crucial role for adults in mediating children's learning by bridging between the internal and external worlds of the child, helping young people to make sense of their experiences of the world in the light of their own internal thoughts and feelings. Returning now to the aims for the session, and this is what we intended to cover, and I trust you'll think we did. So we were aiming to develop people's understanding that young people's behaviour can usefully be seen as a communication. We were hoping to develop further ways of understanding these communications and then to explore on that basis ways in which we could respond to children's behaviour in the light of that. We wanted to acknowledge and recognise that relationships are crucial to supporting young people's learning and behaviour, and that there was a place for attuned communication within that process. So where do we go from here? It's probably helpful to look at what the SBC inclusion framework says, as it sets out a number of roles and responsibilities, and it also shows that nurturing approaches are nested within that framework. There are roles and responsibilities set out for senior officers, for school leaders, and for all school and establishment staff. In other words, everyone has responsibilities here. So let me pick out a number of key points that are particularly relevant from our training today, and in terms of roles and responsibilities. So for all staff, there is something about recognizing behavior as communication. There's something about modeling sensitivity and self-awareness and emotional regulation in all our interactions with children and with their families. There's a responsibility for being familiar with and having knowledge of the national and the SBC policies and procedures and practices. And these are responsibilities that sit for all of us. School leaders have additional responsibilities around firmly embedding those policies within school practice and ensuring that the policies and procedures are developed and implemented in line with the ethos and principles of the SBC's inclusion policy and so on. So there's a clear expectation that we will all work together to do the things that are necessary to develop the SPC's nurturing approach across the authority. That responsibility is shared by all staff in schools and all staff at the centre. And we are supporting the nurture development through a range of CLPL training offers, and there's an expectation that everyone will take advantage of these in the near future. And here are some points for reflection. We hope that you will go away from today and consider these points as individuals and also at a school level, and that the senior leaders in the school will pool these thoughts together. So how can colleagues and I support each other to tune in to what underlies behaviour that can be problematic? What could help me to be an even more successful behaviour detective? How can I develop reframing as an approach? How can I develop my attuned communications in the day-to-day challenges of school life? What elements of other training offers this coming year can build on this for me and for my school? And the key point is how to build on this as an individual and as a school. And that's the end of this session. So thank you, and we look forward to working with you as you put into practice some of the ideas explored here. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.